08:17 local time. The carrier strike group remains on a steady base course, speed constant, wake ruler straight. Clear visibility and a stable sea state remove weather as an explanation for any closure. The surface picture is otherwise routine, dispersed merchant traffic at long range, no dense lanes nearby, no ambiguity in radar returns. 3 surface contacts sit ahead of the group's track line at medium range. Their A's is absent or not correlating. Their motions are correlated with each other rather than with background traffic. The track solutions converge on an intercept geometry. One contact trending toward a crossing position forward of the carrier's bow. 2 contacts offset to port and starboard with shallow inward angles. The screen units hold their assigned stations without adjustment. Separation arcs remain normal for routine operations. No visible course change propagates through the formation. The carrier's track line remains the fixed reference in the plot. Everything else moves relative to it. The 3 contacts increase speed by a small but measurable amount. The lead contact's predicted CPA decreases first, followed by the offsets as their bearing rates tighten. No emissions consistent with fire control radars are detected. The pressure is being applied with geometry and timing alone. 08:20 local time. The lead contact makes a minor course correction, only a few degrees, but it shifts the predicted crossing point closer to the carrier's projected path. The 2 offset contacts adjust within a minute of each other, maintaining a loose symmetry. Port contact drifting toward the carrier's port bow quadrant. Starboard contact mirroring toward the opposite side. Their combined effect is not a clean block yet, but it narrows the carrier's apparent forward maneuver space if a turn were attempted later. Optical systems cue and hold. The silhouettes resolve into compact warship profiles, low freeboard, angular superstructures, wakes consistent with sustained speed rather than drift. Deck-level detail remains indistinct at this range. No flags are visible. The identification remains procedural, unknown warships behaving as a coordinated unit. The carrier does not respond with maneuver. She does not open the picture by turning away or increasing speed. The absence of movement removes the most useful feedback the opposing helms could be testing for. The plot stays clinical, 3 vectors pressing toward the carrier's track. One steady line that does not bend. 08:23 local time. The starboard offset contact increases speed again, enough to change its time to intercept by minutes. The port contact lags by a fraction, then matches. The lead contact holds its speed and tightens its heading in small increments, shaping itself into a crossing threat rather than a parallel shadow. CPA calculations update downward for the lead contact and flatten for the offsets, indicating their job is not to collide, but to constrain. The offsets are building lateral walls while the lead contact tests the lid ahead. The geometry resembles a shallow funnel, not tight enough to be called a box, but designed to force continuous recalculation. The screen begins to matter as geometry, not as narrative. One destroyer sits ahead and slightly abeam, maintaining station on the carrier's forward quarter. Another remains broader on the opposite side. They do not accelerate or cut across the carrier's bow. They remain visible, present, and predictable. Difficult to interpret as provocative. Difficult to ignore as obstacles. No radio calls are answered. There is no bridge-to-bridge response. The opposing ship's silence remains consistent, suggesting intent to communicate solely through motion. 08:26 local time. The lead contact adjusts course across the carrier's track by a few degrees more, reducing the distance at which it will cross ahead if maintained. The crossing point shifts from a comfortable margin to a controlled margin. The bearing rate slows, an indicator the contact is attempting to hold a steady relative line to the carrier's bow rather than simply pass through the area. The port and starboard contacts drift inward by degrees, taking positions that would complicate any large turn by the carrier without forcing an immediate collision avoidance response. Their wakes lengthen, then shorten slightly, indicating throttle work to maintain relative station while closing. Their symmetry is close, but not exact. Inside the strike group's surface picture, the contacts become reference lines, port wall, starboard wall, and a forward cap. The carrier remains the fixed axis, and the picture tightens around her without her own line moving. The closest predicted CPA for the lead contact drops to a range where collision rules become practical rather than theoretical. The plot is still outside immediate danger, but the trend is unambiguous. The updates occur faster. The watch team's logs become denser. 08:29 local time. One of the screen destroyers makes a small station correction, measured, gradual, and consistent with maintaining proper screen geometry, rather than reacting to the opposing ships. The correction subtly changes the available lanes in front of the carrier, without changing the carrier's own course. It creates a new line that the lead contact must account for, if it intends to cross tightly ahead. The lead contact hesitates in speed for a brief interval, then returns to its prior setting. The effect is visible in the wake, and confirmed on radar, a momentary reduction in closure, then stabilization. The port and starboard contacts maintain their inward angles, but their timing becomes less synchronized. The starboard ship corrects earlier, the port ship corrects later, and with a slightly larger rudder input, indicating less precise station keeping. The carrier holds steady. No compensating turn, no increase in speed, no signal beyond continued transit. The constraint remains external, 3 ships making the water around the carrier look smaller than it is. 08:32 local time. The opposing formation tightens. The port and starboard ships reduce lateral spacing relative to the carrier's projected path. Not by dramatic turns, but by cumulative small adjustments. The lead contact resumes a clean crossing alignment. The predicted CPA for the lead contact narrows again, and the time to CPA falls into a window where a delayed correction could matter. The strike group's aircraft remain in routine patterns at altitude, distant and unannounced in their behavior. No unusual flight activity is visible from the surface perspective. The only visible change is increased optical attention. Stabilized cameras tracking each ship's bow, wake, and relative position. Weapons remain covered. The implied readiness is procedural, more sensors focused, more logs captured, more precision in track management. No outward posture changes are presented as threats. The opposing ships do not transmit. The silence persists as the only consistent signature besides their geometry. 08:35 local time. The lead ship makes its most significant course change so far. Still measured but now clear enough to shift the crossing point closer to the carrier's bow than before. The change is not sharp. It is deliberate and sustained, the kind of turn that is intended to be read on radar. The port and starboard ships respond by tightening their inward angles to preserve the funnel. Their combined vectors now offer fewer clean turn options for the carrier if she were to decide to maneuver. The constraint is not absolute. Open ocean is large, but the local geometry is being shaped to make any carrier movement a visible reaction. The carrier does not give that reaction. She continues on the same line. The carrier's wake remains a straight boundary condition, a baseline that refuses to be moved. The screen destroyers remain where they are supposed to be, not forming a new wall, but existing as additional fixed points that complicate the opposing ship's attempt at clean geometry. 08:38 local time. A Seahawk is ordered to launch for observation and presence. The decision is visible in the sequence of deck movements, crew shifting into position, rotor turning, then the aircraft lifting cleanly into the air without hurry. The launch is controlled, not theatrical, and timed to coincide with the opposing ships, pressing toward their tightest geometry. The helicopter climbs to a low operational altitude, and moves ahead of the carrier's bowline, offset to maintain standoff while preserving visual angles on the lead contact. Its flight path is direct and stable, designed to be read as observation rather than pursuit. The opposing ships do not change course in response to the aircraft immediately. Their vectors hold for several minutes. Their silence remains intact. The presence of the helicopter adds a new measurement tool, top-down assessment of spacing, relative wakes, and helms. It also adds a new visible element to the encounter without requiring the carrier to maneuver. 0842 local time. The lead contact's crossing intent becomes explicit in the plot. It now aims to pass ahead of the carrier at a margin that continues to narrow. The bearing rate approaches a hold condition, consistent with a ship attempting to maintain a constant relative bearing to a point forward of the carrier's bow. The Seahawk steadies its orbit and holds optical track. From above, the opposing ship's formation shows slight asymmetry. The port ship's wake indicates marginal throttle oscillations. The starboard ship's wake is smoother, suggesting tighter engine control. The lead ship remains steady, but its small heading corrections are frequent, indicating active effort to hold a precise crossing line. The carrier remains the unmoving reference. No turn. No speed change. The strike group's geometry remains disciplined. The carrier does not lean on the screen to solve the problem for her. The screen remains present, not aggressive. The opposing ships continue to avoid radio communication. The absence of any call removes any pretense of cooperative collision avoidance beyond the minimum required by the fact that they are not actually colliding. 0846 local time. The starboard contact makes a subtle outward correction, only a few degrees, momentarily widening the funnel. It is immediately followed by a compensating inward correction, suggesting either a brief loss of station or a reconsideration of spacing. The port ship does not mirror the move cleanly, and for the first time the symmetry breaks in a way that is not immediately corrected. The lead contact reduces speed slightly. The reduction is small but enough to change the time to CPA and shift the crossing point forward by a fraction. The effect is that the lead contact no longer looks committed to a tight cross directly in front of the carrier at the most constrained distance. The Seahawk adjusts its orbit to maintain a stable visual line on the lead contact, then slides laterally to observe the port ship's deviations. The aircraft remains outside any path that would be interpreted as interfering. It records and watches. The carrier remains steady. The ocean remains clear. The only tension is in the numbers that stop shrinking as quickly as before. 0850 local time. The port contact increases speed briefly to recover station, then settles. The maneuver is visible as a wake lengthening and then shortening. The starboard contact holds steady, and the lead contact speed remains reduced relative to its previous setting. The result is a momentary distortion of the funnel. The port wall shifts forward while the starboard wall lags. The lead contact makes another minor heading adjustment, but now the adjustment increases its CPA rather than decreases it. The crossing point moves outward, still in front, but no longer pressing toward the tightest margin it had been shaping. In the surface picture, this is read as hesitation. Not a withdrawal yet, but a failure to sustain the clean geometry required to keep the carrier constrained without risk. A coordinated constraint requires discipline and timing. The opposing ships are now showing small errors. The Seahawk holds position and continues observation. The carrier continues transit without acknowledgement beyond movement. 0855 local time. The starboard contact reduces speed slightly, opening lateral spacing and allowing the funnel to loosen. The port contact holds its speed, and the lead ship maintains the higher CPA line it established minutes earlier. The three ships are still coordinated in general intent, but they are no longer moving as a single precise unit. The carrier's screen remains constant. A destroyer on the forward quarter holds a steady lane, providing a stable barrier to any renewed attempt by the lead contact to cross tightly without creating a clear collision hazard. The screen's mere existence increases the complexity of the opposing ship's math. No weapons are displayed. No overt readiness posture is shown topside. The escalation remains strictly in the movement patterns and the refusal of the carrier to move. The opposing ships remain silent. No bridge-to-bridge calls. No signal flags. No change in behavior that suggests a shift to communication. The only messages remain in their spacing. 09:02 local time. The lead contact turns away by a measurable amount, increasing its CPA and shifting from a crossing block to a forward quarter shadow. The change is not dramatic. It is gradual enough to preserve face and safe enough to avoid becoming a collision risk. The port and starboard contacts begin to widen their offsets, reducing inward angles. The Seahawk transitions its orbit forward, and then abeam, maintaining visual confirmation that the lead ship's new vector is consistent. The aircraft does not chase. It stays in a geometry that keeps the ships under observation without compressing their space. The carrier continues on the same track line. No correction is made to take advantage of the easing picture. The carrier's wake remains straight, reinforcing that the outcome is not being won by maneuver, but by not providing one. The surface picture opens by fractions first, then by wider margins as the opposing ships accept greater spacing. 09:10 local time. The port contact breaks its earlier timing discipline and turns outward before the starboard ship, leaving a brief period where the three ships are no longer forming a coherent constraint. The starboard contact follows later, slower to accept the opening geometry. The lead contact maintains its new shadow line at a safer distance. The Seahawk drifts to a position that allows a simultaneous view of all three ships, then holds. The aircraft's presence remains constant, steady, and non-interfering. It functions as an additional sensor platform and a visible reminder that the encounter is being recorded from multiple angles. The carrier's escorts remain steady. Formation spacing returns to a feel of routine operations, not by any announcements, but by the simple fact that the opposing ships are no longer closing. The opposing ships do not transmit. Their silence continues through disengagement. 09:20 local time. The distance opens beyond the earlier constrained envelope. Bearings change more slowly. CPA values stabilize above the thresholds that had required rapid recalculation. The funnel geometry dissolves into three separate shadow tracks, each with more independent spacing. The Seahawk holds for confirmation of sustained separation, then begins a controlled return toward the strike group, still keeping the contacts in view during the transition. No abrupt departure is made that could be misread as a signal. It is simply the next procedural step as the picture normalizes. The carrier remains on course. The strike group's motions return to baseline, steady, predictable, and uninterested in forcing a reaction. The opposing ships continue to widen, their wakes diverging as their headings separate. Their earlier attempt at constraint ends without announcement and without replacement by any other tactic. 09:34 local time. The Seahawk recovers back aboard in a standard pattern. Rotor wash settles. Deck crews clear the aircraft without urgency. The surface picture remains open, the opposing contacts now at ranges that no longer compress local maneuvering space. The carrier continues transit on the same line, speed unchanged. The escorts hold formation. The opposing ships remain on the horizon line as diminishing returns, still present, still silent, but no longer shaping the carrier's immediate geometry. The encounter resolves the way it began, through track lines and spacing, with no radio exchange, no weapons activity, and no maneuver from the carrier. The only lasting artifacts are the logs, the recorded vectors, and the quiet return to routine operations as the distance continues to open.